Show me the way to go home. That's old Uncle Luke for you, because home is where God is. That's what we want to get into. And we want to keep doing a deeper dive on this twisted idea that, Jesus from Galilee said that we were twisted and this generation is twisted. What does he mean? Well, the apostles will show us that Christians are the worst, except for all the rest. Anyhow, come on in. Let's check it out. Luke chapter 9, chapter 9, verse 49 to 56. All the bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind. Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Man, we are glad you're here because we like people talking about God, and that's, just what we're trying to do. If people just read their Bible, said their prayers, and got together and talked to God, it just makes life go better. I'm living proof of that. I started doing this about 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, and it's just a game changer in life, thinking about God. That is all we're trying to get our brains to do, is think like God, because the Bible gets us into the groove. And the Bible is a great place because there is nothing, absolutely nothing. So if a Bubba like me can do it, every Bubba can do it. Steal it, anything you find on this channel, take it for your own, work it into your conversations. That's all we hope for. Anyhow, we're calling all Bubbas and the Bubbettes of the world to talk about God. And speaking of talking about God, when Mary, Aunt Mary, I don't know what you want to call Jesus' mom, but, Aunt Mary, she should be like a friend of ours, and someone that we rely on and listen to. And when Mary talks, she says that her soul magnifies the Lord and that her spirit rejoices in God, her Savior. Man, if we just talk like that, I think every day would go a little bit better. If we got everybody talking like that, I think we'd all be doing better. And if we could get everybody thinking, if we could just get everybody thinking that we actually have a Father who is in heaven, and his name should be hallowed, not our name or anybody else's name, that we should be honoring his name, that we should just be hallowing his name. We ought to be talking good about God. That's all hallow means. Talk good about God. And thinking about how his kingdom is coming and his will should be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that, we need daily bread that comes from God, his words and everything else that sustains us in life. And forgiveness is the heart of the issue. We need forgiven. And when we pray the Lord's Prayer, we say, forgive us as we forgive others. And so that's God's game plan. Lead us not into temptation, Lord, but deliver us from evil. And believe me, if we were forgiving others and asking for forgiveness ourselves, think about what a better place this would be. It always makes the world a better place. And this is how you get the ring the chamois of life to its absolute fullest. And that's what we're into, man. We want everybody to live their life to the absolute fullest. Nobody gets hurt whenever they actually read their Bible well. Nobody gets hurt whenever they read their Bible well. This is one of those great passages that Uncle Luke, shares with us because he was right there in the front lines of the action. So let's do a dive in here and check out what we're talking about. And what we're talking about comes from Luke chapter 9, verse 49 to 56. But we've already taken a look at this a couple talks ago, and we've slowed it down last talk that we looked at. But, Jesus' disciples, after Jesus comes down from the mountain with three of them, Jesus' disciples have lost their power. They've lost their miracle, abilities, so to speak. Jesus had given it to them, but now it appears it's taken away. And we should be asking ourselves, why? Well, now we're finding out why. Because they're not thinking like Jesus. And Jesus ain't going to give no miracle power to his guys if they ain't thinking like he is. And it all breaks down. Jesus says, oh, you twisted generation. How long am I going to be with you? Come on, fellas, think about this. Anyhow, so last week we saw that what Jesus meant about being twisted and this generation being twisted, which he'd say exactly the same thing to all of our generations, that we are twisted. And the thing that gets us twisted, and Jesus calling us out on that, is that we start talking about and thinking about who's the greatest. And we're not thinking about our Father who is in heaven. Hallowed should be his name. We're thinking about our name. Anyhow, so we talked about that last week. Go back, check that out if you missed it. Who is the greatest? Well, Jesus is the greatest. God is the greatest. And when we start trying to measure our life about, our greatness, it's going to go sideways. And we're out of step with Jesus. Okay, so now we get the next part that unfolds. And this is a deeper dive into who I call the Dirty Dozen. because Jesus doesn't pick these spotless people who are all perfect and prim and proper. He actually picks, the Bubbas of the world. He actually picks the Middle Eastern rednecks, the hill country people, hillbillies. That's who he picks. He picks hard Carhartt people. For the most part, all of Jesus' handpicked dudes are Carhartt wearing people, even though Carhartt's not around yet. But you get the gist. And so what is absolutely remarkable, is how honest and open they are about the story. We're the ones who read it weird. They tell the story perfectly. We're the ones who get on and not because we don't know what to do with them. First of all, we try to make them into saints. Maybe they're saints, but they're trying to tell us what rotten ideas that they had and how their rotten ideas are probably just like our rotten ideas. So the first rotten, so now we also get a really clear, picture here of why Jesus has taken these powers away from the boys. Because John says to Jesus, he said, "Hey man, I saw someone casting out demons." And here's the thing. He says, "I saw someone casting out demons in your name. And we tried to stop them, but he doesn't follow us." Jesus said, "Well, don't stop him. I mean, if he's not against us, then he's for us." I mean, and Jesus' point is, what? What are you thinking? This is what we want. We want more people in my name. We don't want less people in my name. We want more people in my name. And so, but you got to admit, these guys are being super transparent about their lives and about how they were the worst. And if they were the worst and tell us that they're the worst, how much more should we say and be willing to say that we too can be the worst? We too can get into these really bad ideas just like they did. So looking at other people and saying, well, they're not doing it right, and I'm better than they are somehow in the equation. Jesus saying, man, that is just that is worldly stuff. That is human stuff. That's not godly stuff. That's not what God's telling you here. And then the next scene gets even worse because as they are drawing closer to Jerusalem, the story has changed. Jesus is heading to Jerusalem. They stop into a Samaritan town, or Jesus sends them ahead, the dirty dozen ahead, and he says, "Hey, get some preparations going in the Samaritan town." And the guys come back and they're like, "Hey, they reject us." And Jesus is like, all right. But here's what they say next. They're like, hey, Lord, should we tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? Kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah. Because they rejected you, Lord. They rejected us, Lord. Should we just call hellfire and brimstone down on them? Should we call the sulfurs of Sodom and Gomorrah down on them? And Jesus is like, no. And the text actually says, he turned and rebuked them. He put them down, baby. He said, no. And now we see perfectly why Jesus has taken their miracle powers away. Because they are not tracking. The last thing Jesus wants is for these guys to have miracle powers whenever they are doing what anybody with power does with them, and that is the worst thing possible. They start using against other people. And so Jesus, and is it no wonder, that Jesus isn't going to really give us these kind of powers today? Do we really think people would do the right thing if they were given all these powers? And so when somebody starts saying they got the powers, all I'm saying is how are you? I guess I'm saying, I don't know, maybe, but I doubt it. I have my skeptic. These guys had their power taken away for good reasons. And Jesus will give it back to them. We'll see that coming up. But I think most of us would have our power taken away from us. If Jesus gave it to us for a second, I think most of us would have it taken back away. I know I would. I don't know about you. But anyhow, the transparency is that these guys demonstrate is the heart of the Bible. The Bible is transparent like no other book. The Bible is honest like no other book. The only document, the only source of true honesty is the Bible. I just believe that because, the world tells us, oh, it's written by men. I'm like, yeah, but these ideas come from God. And this will be our point in this talk, and Uncle Luke's point to us too. Because, when Jesus takes the power away from from his boys, Jesus put a stop to it. But but let's think about this for a second. What the disciples want, sure, you and I can laugh at that and we're like, yeah, that's out of step and that's out of line with Jesus, brother. But there's an awful lot of people who are, also recognizing that, yeah, that's exactly what you do when you get that kind of power. What the disciples want here, to use, the powers that Jesus has given them to exclude others if they're not part of their inside group, is exactly what we do when we have too much power. We do the same types of things. And worse yet, we formulate in our mind that people who are against us should be punished right now and on the spot. If we had the power of rain and fire and sulfur down on them, we probably would. And so the deal that we have here is that what the disciples want to do is what everybody wants whenever they have power. The disciples just want the same stuff everybody else does, and what the same stuff the world around us does constantly. This is what the world around us does with power. This is what, our own politicians in the United States do with power. We see this pattern repeat throughout history. As far back as we can read human history, we can see how power is always abused. And so, this is why the founders of this country and many other people before them talked about government in a way that should be talked about, and that is that government is only a necessary evil at best. The human story is a story that has been troubled mostly by human government. Almost, hey, when it comes to mass murders, when it comes to mass killings, it's government that is stirring up the pot against other governments and sending people out to do their dirty work. That's what people with power do. They love to punish other people and show that they have more power than them. And they love to pretend like there is another group of people out there that needs to be punished. And Jesus is making it absolutely clear that he will have none of this. In fact, Jesus is bringing a new dominion into this world. Dominion means power. The old dominion, and hey, I went to Old Dominion, as a college. The Old Dominion. We're not talking about Virginia's nickname here. The Old Dominion is what Jesus is knocking down to its knees. And there is no religion, there's no nation, there's no ethnicity, there's no color of skin people that are out there doing what Jesus is doing by toppling the old dominion and putting in a whole new dominion. Yeah, it's just Jesus. And go back in the storyline and find out that what Jesus is actually, putting in play is blessed are the poor. Blessed are you who are hungry. Blessed are you who weep now. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and revile you and spur your name on account of me. And he says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless and bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, turn the other cheek. All of this stuff is the new dominion that Jesus is calling out. And so he is not going to endorse ever. Jesus does not endorse ever any use of force, violence, or all of these bad ideas that are just common to humanity. This is what human beings have a hard time admitting to. We're the ones with the bad ideas. Jesus is the one with the good ideas. In fact, God, throughout the pages of the Hebrew Bible and the new part of the Bible in Jesus' own lips, is always saying the same thing, that the old dominion is not working. We are the old dominion. Jesus, God, is the new dominion. When we pray, your kingdom come, we are praying for that new dominion to settle in permanently and forevermore. And so it's Jesus that puts in the radical new dominion of love your enemies, do good, lend to those who, and expect nothing in return. Think about your reward in heaven, not here on earth. And if anybody's going to come after me, Jesus said, deny yourself and take up your cross daily to follow me. Let this sink into your ears. And Jesus leads the way on this to the cross of the Romans outside of the town garbage, on the town garbage heap outside Jerusalem, under the authority of the Roman government and under the authority of even the Jewish government. But Jesus leads the way on this. He does not endorse violence, exclusion, nasty talk to people. He does not put people down. He challenges their thinking, but he doesn't put people down. And we shouldn't either. You see, the whole world that we now live in, especially if you're living in the United States, of equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, progress, this is what has come out of the Christian side of the world. The idea that human beings, all human beings, regardless of skin color, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of their nationality, wherever they come from in the world, that all human beings have rights, that they are born equal, that every neighbor that you have deserves the sustenance to live, a sandwich, a meal, some protective clothing, etc., and protection from persecution. These truths are only self-evident to God. These truths have never been self-evident to human beings. Only when God takes the lead on them do they become self-evident to us. And the people who think that these truths are self-evident are the ones who have been hurt and abused by others. The people who do the hurting and the abusing, they don't think this is self-evident. And they come up with all kinds of tricky ways as to why they wouldn't have to, do that kind of thing. And they talk out of both sides of their mouths. But anyhow, it's Jesus that brings all of this about. And this is what Jesus is bringing about. And this is why the disciples have lost their power. But these disciples are good people who, the hallmark of a good person is someone who can be honest about the mistakes that they have made and share them with you. And that's what these guys are doing. And that's why I read the Bible from front to back. It is a storyline put together by men. Oh yeah, men. But these men who showed that they were just schleps that God used undeservedly, but he used them and he changed them and he made them better men. And sometimes they still kept screwing up, but they kept pursuing the God who loved them first. And they learned. The apostles learned their lesson here, but they didn't get it at first. They assumed, like we would all assume, that if Jesus gives us these superpowers, that, we're supposed to be the judge, jury, and executioners to whoever we think. And then we think that, Jesus is like giving us some sort of wink, wink, like, yeah, there you go, buddy. He's not giving you no wink, wink. If you're out there putting people down and using violence of any kind and hamstringing people and not being good to people, if you ain't loving people, Jesus ain't giving you no wink. You're on your own. You are on your own. But listen, let's just take another honest assessment about Christianity, and that is that, Christianity for its first 300 years had no help. They didn't have any support, that, they didn't have any power. They didn't have any influence. Rome didn't like them, but Rome could hardly even know that they existed. But when they did know they existed, they didn't treat them very well. The Jews didn't like the Christians. That kept going. Nobody really liked the Christians, but the Christians kept on growing for 300 years. It's a fascinating story. For 300 years, Christianity just grows into the Roman Empire. And eventually the Roman Empire kind of falls and the Christians are like, yeah, we'll take over. But no doubt when Christianity got power, the power of Rome, it did the wrong thing. That was predictable. Every mistake that Israel made, the church has made as well. The church is not without blemish. I don't need people telling me that the church, has done wrong things. I know they do wrong things because the apostles say they did wrong things. If the apostles did wrong things, then how much more would I expect the church to commit errors, right? And they do. So as the church got power, after 300, 400 AD, somewhere around in there, it took about 500 years, but in 500 years' time, they would look around and they would say, there's a new religion on the scene that has been taking up a lot of our territory, the Muslims. And yeah, they sent out the Crusaders to war against them. And that was not endorsed by Jesus. I don't care what those Crusaders thought. They were not endorsed by Jesus. But let's also keep this in context. This was nothing more than one government fighting another government. Let's not, kid ourselves and think that this was really about religion. Oh yeah, everybody had religion on their lips, but it wasn't about religion. It was the fact that Islam had taken a whole bunch of Roman Empire territory, and the Christians said, well, we've got to respond. And the best way to rally people into, an army is to give them a religious cause to fight for. But the fact is, and many people said it at the time, this is not from God. God is not calling you to go fight in his name. If you need to fight, fight, but don't use God's name. Humans will fight. That's a reality. And nobody gets to say that God's on their side. That's only the message of Jesus and Jesus alone. And so, yeah, the Crusades were wrong, but so were the Muslims. The Muslims took the territory first. Can't say that I blame them. But let's not pretend like they were innocents in this thing. And the Crusaders, let's not pretend that they were God's instruments. No. They were just humans doing what humans do. And what do humans do? They use their power to bully up on other people. And that's exactly the point that Jesus is saying. No. This is not the new dominion. This is not the new dominion. The new dominion, I've told you what it's all about. And now let's think about the Inquisitions too, right? Christians get reminded all the time, what about the Inquisitions? Yeah, sure, they were wrong, but who were the first people on the scenes, first of all, to call the Crusades wrong? It was Christians. Christians reading their Bible well. Who were the first people on the scene saying the Inquisitions are wrong? Christians. And yeah, sure, Christianity also, seemed to get involved in slavery. It didn't too much compared to the rest of the world, but it did. And when it did, who was the first ones on the scene to say this is wrong? This ain't endorsed by Jesus. There's none of this that's Christian. It was Christians. You see, the Muslims didn't show up to tell us that the Inquisitions were bad or the Crusades were bad or that slavery is bad. No. Nor did the Buddhists and nor did the Hindus. And hey, I don't have anything against them. I'm just saying they didn't show up on the scene to say that the Inquisitions were wrong and the Crusades were wrong and the slavery's wrong. It was the Christians who did. And speaking of slavery, really the guy who put anti-slavery once and for all in verbal form, in biblical expression, was this short 4-foot-tall guy named Benjamin Lay. And Benjamin Lay was even a hunchback, and so was his wife. And he was a Quaker, the Society of Friends in the 1600s. And he said, I don't care what anybody says. Slavery is not justified from Jesus Christ and from the Bible. Don't and listen, any Christian that tried to justify slavery never used the Bible to justify slavery. They used Aristotle. Hey, I got news for you. Aristotle's not a Christian. He's Greek. Anybody trying to justify slavery used Aristotle, because Aristotle and all of Greek's philosophers said the same thing, and that is, slavery's like poor. It's an unfortunate necessity. It's a necessary evil. It's something you're never going to get rid of. It was little Benjamin Lay, the first one to say, and there were plenty of Christians before that were not into slavery. And most of the popes, by the way, were not endorsing slavery. Anytime slavery was brought to them, they're like, you can't justify this. And so they did not. Every once in a while, you get a weird pope that kind of goes off the rails. There were a couple. But Christian history really is not a history of using slaves, hardly at all. The Roman Empire, after the fall of Rome and when the Christians took over, had very little time nor need for slaves. A little here, a little there, but nothing like the rest of the world was doing. But that doesn't justify it, and that's a sad scene. The Inquisitions were wrong. The Crusades were wrong. Slavery, wrong. But note this. The first ones to criticize Christians at their worst are Christians, nobody else. In today's marketplace, you get all these sassy, smarty pants coming in, like putting their finger in Christianity's face saying, you guys are the worst. Okay, I'll accept that. We are the worst. My apostles, my Jesus, my God tells me I'm the worst. In fact, that's what God told Israel when he called them. He said, don't be thinking you're the best. You're actually the worst. But I picked you. And that's the way God is. He picks. He picks out of his love. Notice how I rubbed my nose when I said picks. That was kind of funny. But nonetheless, when the worst of Christianity is the worst, it's Christians, it's Jesus Christ that calls Christians back into action. And see, the worst human behavior that is being pointed out here is the human behavior that Frederick Hayek pointed out as well. And that is, take a dude A and then dude B, and they have an agreement and they get along fine and they're working on their agreement. And then there's dude C. And dude C looks in on A and B and is annoyed that these two dudes can work it out without dude C. And when dude C gets annoyed, very bad things start to happen. And that is usually the role of government, but other people take on that role as well. But when we start thinking about who can we stop, and when we start thinking about who can we rain fire down on because we just don't like them and they rejected us. Boo-hoo. They rejected you. Hey, if you got to punch somebody in the nose, I suppose punch them in the nose, you're probably going to anyhow, but don't put Jesus' name on it. That's my point. Anyhow, all that stuff, inquisitions, crusades, slavery, yeah, I know it's wrong. But it were Christians that said that it was wrong. Nobody else said it was wrong. And then once Christians said it was wrong, then everybody's like, yeah, that is wrong. Come on, give me a break. That's the oldest trick in the book. And then they hold it against us. And that's what's going on in today's marketplace. Hey, Christians called themselves wrong before anybody called us wrong. And the people calling us wrong, they made the same mistakes too. Their people made the same mistakes too. Whoever they come from, that's fine. But they are as guilty as you and I might be in our history of who we come from in all of these categories: inquisitions, crusades, slavery, war, all of that. All of that. You see, all of us are guilty. And that's the beauty of the gospel. And that's the beauty of the apostles, the dirty dozen, is saying, man, get to that point where you realize that you're dirty too. And as soon as you get to that point, you are right where God wants you, because he wants to pick you up and he wants to build you up. And he wants you to get on board with his new dominion now. Don't wait till later, now. Get on the party train of God's new dominion. Anyhow, that's what Jesus is saying. That's what Uncle Luke is saying. And we'll catch you next time.